The Roman Empire, the original blueprint for collapse. The Roman Empire didn't just fall, it gave us the blueprint for how a superpower self-destructs. It started with political cancer. The Praetorian Guard became kingmakers, assassinating and auctioning the throne, murdering over 20 emperors in 50 years. Trust vanished. The economy died next. Built on plunder and slaves, expansion stopped, so plunder stopped. To pay the army, they debased silver currency until it was worthless, causing hyperinflation over 10,000%. This broke the army. Stretched over 2,500 miles, they hired disloyal foreign mercenaries, making it bloated and brittle. Finally, the migration crisis. The Huns pushed Goths and Vandals across the Danube. Rome, too weak to integrate them, treated them as second class, so they turned their swords against Rome. The outcome? The West was carved into barbarian kingdoms by 476 AD. The long-term impact? Rome proved no walls can protect an empire rotting inside, a warning in stone and blood. The Byzantine Empire, the 1,000-year-long decline. The Byzantine Empire was Rome's ghost, a zombie state that walked for 1,000 years after the West fell. Its decline was a slow bleed from 1,000 cuts. Constantinople, protected by the Theodosian walls and Greek fire, faced relentless pressure. First, the Persian Sassanids, then the Arabs who took half its territory in 20 years, then the Seljuk and Ottoman Turks. The fatal wound came from within Christendom. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople. They didn't just loot it, they gutted it, melting statues for coins and stealing relics, leaving it a smoking ruin. The empire never recovered. The final blow in 1453 was technological failure. Massive Ottoman cannons, like the Basilica, firing 1,200-pound stones, breached walls that stood for a millennium. After a 53-day siege, the Ottomans poured in. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, died fighting. The outcome? The end of a 2,200-year Roman line. The long-term impact? It shifted world power, closed overland Asian trade routes, and forced Europeans to seek a sea route, sparking the age of exploration. The zombie was put to rest.
The Mongol Empire, the empire that was too big to exist. The Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history, from Korea to Hungary. Its collapse was baked into its success, built for conquest, not governing. It exploded under Genghis Khan, unifying steppe tribes with revolutionary tactics like the composite bow on horseback. But an empire is not an army. The first crack was succession. When Genghis died, it split among his 4 sons into khanates, the Yuan in China, Golden Horde in Russia, Ilkhanate in Persia, and Chagatai in Central Asia. They fought each other more than external enemies. They had no unified system, no common currency, central bureaucracy, or core cultural identity. They were outsiders ruling larger, advanced populations like the Chinese in the Yuan dynasty. Within generations, conquerors were absorbed, becoming Buddhist, Muslim, or Confucian. They stopped being Mongols. The outcome? By the mid-1300s, it shattered into rival states that all fell. The long-term impact? Speed and scale in conquest mean nothing without a plan to build something lasting. It was a flash of lightning, spectacular, world-changing, and gone instantly. The Ming Dynasty, how isolationism sunk the treasure fleet. In the early 1400s, Ming China was the world's superpower. Admiral Zheng He's treasure fleet, ships over 400 feet long, sailed to Africa. Then they burned the ships, destroyed records, and closed ports. The ruling class saw voyages as expensive vanity and feared foreign influence, choosing isolationism. Sealing the doors bred internal trouble. The economy became dependent on silver from Spanish America. When that flow stopped, it crashed. A little ice age caused famines and massive peasant revolts. As rebels stormed the Forbidden City in 1644, Ming generals opened the Great Wall to the Manchu armies for help. The Manchus crushed the rebellion and then stayed. The outcome? The fall of the Ming and rise of the Qing. The long-term impact? a 400-year retreat from global leadership, leaving China centuries behind when European gunships arrived. They chose security over greatness and lost both. The Aztec Empire, the empire that made too many enemies. The Aztec Empire wasn't destroyed by 600 Spanish conquistadors, it was dismantled by its own subjects. They built a carer-based tributary empire. Their island capital, Tenochtitlan, was an engineering marvel, but their rule was brutal, demanding heavy tribute and constant human sacrifices from rival tribes. When Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519, subject peoples like the Tlaxcalans saw liberators, not invaders. Cortés led a coalition. At the final battle, over 75% of his forces were native allies. Then, smallpox struck a population with zero immunity, killing Emperor Cuitlahuac and up to half the city. The outcome? Tenochtitlan was razed, becoming New Spain. The long-term impact is a masterclass in geopolitical failure. Power based only on fear and extraction creates no allies. When a challenger appears, your empire collapses from within.
The Spanish Empire, how gold and silver bankrupted a superpower. History's greatest irony, the Spanish Empire was killed by too much money. In the 1500s, mountains of silver and gold from the Americas poured into Seville. This wealth was a poison pill. First, it caused runaway inflation. Prices quadrupled in a century, making Spanish goods uncompetitive. They became a consumer nation, dependent on rivals' imports. Second, it created a phantom economy. The Habsburg kings spent it on endless religious wars, financing a global empire on credit. By 1600, the crown defaulted on its debts 14 times. The empire became a hollow shell. The Invincible Armada was defeated in 1588. They lost the Dutch provinces, and they poured resources into protecting treasure fleets instead of building a productive economy. The outcome? By the late 1600s, Spain was a second-rate power. The long-term impact is the classic resource curse. Easy wealth destroys the need to innovate, invest, or build. An empire built on loot eventually runs out of things to steal. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe's long demise. For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire was a titan. Its collapse was a slow fade, earning it the name the sick man of Europe. The disease was a refusal to change. First, technological arrogance. While Europe embraced the Renaissance and scientific revolution, the Ottomans banned the Arabic printing press for 300 years, creating a fatal knowledge gap. Second, institutional rot. The elite Janissary Corps, once merit-based slave soldiers, became a hereditary aristocracy that blocked all military reform. Finally, the economic model died. Wealth came from conquest. When expansion stopped at Vienna in 1683, the system stalled. They couldn't compete with Atlantic trade routes. Corruption became the state's glue. The outcome was a long, humiliating retreat, losing the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East. The final blow was picking the losing side in World War I. The empire dissolved in 1922. The long-term impact? It redrew the Middle East map, creating modern, often unstable states. The lesson? Adapt or die. The Portuguese Empire, the first global empire and the first to fade. Tiny Portugal built the first global empire, from Brazil to Japan. Its failure is a masterclass in the limits of scale. Their strategy was the Feitoria system, a network of fortified trading posts like Goa and Macau to control the spice trade. It was cost-effective, but flawed. They were permanently overstretched. With a population smaller than modern-day London, they couldn't send enough soldiers to hold distant outposts. Each fort was isolated and vulnerable. Then, bigger rivals, the Dutch and English, with superior navies and joint stock companies arrived. They systematically picked off Portugal's undefended assets. Portugal's fate was sealed in 1580 when its king died without an heir and Spain invaded. For 60 years, Portugal was ruled from Madrid. Its empire was neglected and used as a pawn in Spain's wars. The outcome? By the 1700s, Portugal was a junior partner to England. Its empire reduced mostly to Brazil, which it later lost. The long-term impact? They proved that in empire building, quality beats quantity. A thin, wide network snaps under pressure.
You can't rule the world with a skeleton crew. The Mughal Empire, how religious intolerance shattered Indian unity. Under Akbar the Great, the Mughal Empire was a model of pluralistic stability, thriving by abolishing discriminatory taxes and blending cultures. Emperor Aurangzeb shattered this in 1679 by reinstating the jizya tax on Hindus and destroying temples, while waging a 27-year costly war in the Deccan. He turned loyal Hindu Rajput allies into enemies and awoke the ferocious Maratha Confederacy, who bled the treasury dry with guerrilla raids. Fighting the Marathas in the south and Sikhs in the north, the empire was bankrupt and exhausted. When Aurangzeb died in 1707, it fragmented swiftly. By 1739, it was so weak that Persian invader Nader Shah could sack Delhi, slaughter 30,000, and steal the Peacock Throne and Koh-i-Noor diamond. This power vacuum allowed the British East India Company to rise. The lesson? An empire built on inclusion can become a superpower. One ruled by exclusion will tear itself apart. Napoleon's French Empire, the autopsy of overreach. Napoleon's empire, built on military genius, collapsed from terminal overreach. His continental system blockade, meant to cripple Britain, backfired, strangling allied economies and breeding smuggling and resentment. Then, in 1812, he marched over 600,000 men into Russia. The Russians retreated, burning their land, leaving him an empty, burning Moscow. The winter retreat turned the Grande Armée into a frozen mob. Over 400,000 died. His invincibility shattered. A united coalition defeated him at Leipzig in 1813. After exile and a brief return, he was crushed at Waterloo in 1815. The outcome? His empire dissolved. The long-term impact? He left Europe exhausted, but spread revolutionary nationalism and legal reforms that would later destroy the old monarchies. His empire died by stretching too far for the coldest prize. The British Empire, the unraveling after World War II. At its peak, the British Empire ruled a quarter of the globe. Its orderly collapse was driven by bankruptcy and conscience. 2 world wars left Britain effectively bankrupt by 1945, unable to afford garrisoning India or maintaining a global navy. Simultaneously, the moral foundation crumbled. The racist ideology of the white man's burden was discredited by fighting Nazi tyranny. Leaders like Gandhi exposed the hypocrisy of denying freedom abroad while championing it in Europe. India's independence in 1947 triggered a domino effect. Colonies across Africa and the Caribbean gained sovereignty through the 1950s and 60s. The outcome? The empire transformed into the voluntary commonwealth of nations. The long-term impact? It created a world of nation-states with borders drawn by Britain that still cause conflict. Britain proved an empire built on economic and moral authority falls when it loses both.
The Third Reich, a 12-year empire built on delusion. The Nazi Thousand-Year Reich lasted 12 years because it was a death cult designed to collapse. Its economy was a house of cards, funded by looting and printing money, with over 75% of industry geared for war by 1941, a predator economy needing constant conquest. Its ideology was suicidal. The Holocaust drained resources and turned Eastern Europe into hostile territory, fueling partisan resistance. Its strategy guaranteed a two-front war. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 and declared war on the U.S. Facing the combined industrial might of the U.S., USSR, and British Empire, defeat was inevitable. The outcome? Total defeat in 1945, Germany's division in the exposure of history's worst crimes. The long-term impact? It spurred the creation of the UN, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in NATO to prevent such evil from rising again. The Soviet Union, the empire that ran out of ideas and money. The Soviet Union collapsed not on a battlefield, but in its grocery stores. Central planning failed to produce basic goods, causing chronic shortages, long bread lines, and a black market. Meanwhile, they spent up to 25% of GDP on the military-industrial complex to compete with the US. This created a crisis of legitimacy. Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, backfired. Glasnost allowed people to speak truth about failures. Perestroika revealed the system's broken machinery. The final blow was nationalism. Captive republics like Ukraine and the Baltics demanded independence. A 1991 hardliner coup failed, and the republics seceded. The outcome? On December 26, 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin. The long-term impact? It proved an ideology cannot survive if it fails to deliver a decent life. Guns can't fill empty stomachs or quiet the desire for freedom. The Empire of Japan, the fatal gamble of co-prosperity. Japan's empire rose swiftly, defeating China and Russia in 50 years. Its collapse came from a military machine it couldn't control. In the 1930s, radical junior officers took over, assassinating cautious politicians. The military's ideology was the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, a cover for conquest. This led to the quagmire, invading China in 1937, a brutal stalemate draining resources. Needing oil and rubber, Japan targeted Southeast Asia, meaning war with the US. The 1941 Pearl Harbor attack was a tactical success, but strategic catastrophe, unifying US industrial might 10 times Japan's output. A war of attrition followed. Japan's Navy and Air Force were destroyed island by island. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 were the final shocks. The outcome? Total surrender, occupation, and dismantled empire. The long-term impact? It Japanized, reborn as a pacifist economic power. The lesson? When military sets strategy based on glory, not resources, it leads the nation off a cliff. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, how Alexander exploited a weakened core. The Persian Empire under Darius the Great was an ancient superpower with royal roads and respect for local customs. But by Alexander's invasion in 334 BC, it was a giant with brittle bones. Its fatal weakness was decentralization. Satraps, governors, became local kings with their own armies, weakening loyalty to the distant King of Kings. Alexander faced a disunified realm. Satraps made poor tactical choices to preserve their own power. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius III's chariot charge nearly won, but when Darius fled, his army's will collapsed with him. Persia's army was a multinational patchwork reliant on Greek mercenaries. Its vast size made mobilization slow. The outcome? Alexander toppled the empire in 4 years, burning Persepolis in 330 BC. Darius was murdered by his own satraps. The long-term impact? The Hellenistic age fused Greek and Persian culture. The lesson? An empire is only as strong as the loyalty of its parts. Centralized administration without loyalty is a list of future rebels.